interfacial characteristics of composite materials using density functional theory method. 7 clicks. Next slide. So in the next slides, I'll be discussing motivation to this project and introduction to the materials, and further I'll be talking about results I have calculated in terms of interaction energy as well as in mechanical response. And at the end, I'll be talking about the conclusion we have made from obtained results. So next. So the right hand side, this figure is, okay, you did 2 clicks. It's just a model to show how monomers interact with each other. Next slide. Yeah, so motivation to this project is to send humans on Mars, which is not for a year or a 2 year, but more than 20 years. So for that, we need large storage capacity and strong materials to sustain conditions on Mars. So NASA Research Center has initiated this work. Next. Next. So they have started this ASCOM project, and after some research, they have decided that polymer composites can be considered as suitable material for spacecrafts, etc., for Mars or for deep space exploration. Now, if we look at the literature in the right-hand side figure, already 50% of materials used in commercial aircraft is composite materials, but still challenges have to be met, as we need a material with high strength and lightweight, and again for a longer period which can stay. Next slide. 3 clicks. So question now is what are composite materials, as I'm talking about composite materials here. So composite materials consist of 2 materials as shown in the top right figure, which has different physical and chemical properties, but combined together to produce a new material that have different properties to those of the constituents. So as explained in this figure, composite consists of 2 phases, where one is called matrix and another is called as reinforcement. So in our work, we have used polymers as matrix and flat carbon nanotubes as reinforcements. So in the figure left-hand side, Shihaki et al. Has demonstrated that composite materials have high strength than other existing materials used in structural applications. However, metals have similar strength, but they lag behind because of their higher weight. Next slide. So 4 clicks, yes. So as I mentioned in the title that we are investigating interfacial characteristics, again, the question is why interface? So the interface is the important property to study. So the answer is when 2 materials combine with each other, they make some kind of bond, which is responsible for the strength of the conjugated system and is called as interface. So Kinloch et al. Studied, and they found that interaction at the surface can be of various types, as shown in the figure. To find that interaction properties or strength, we have chosen 2 ways here. First is interaction energy between the monomer and graphene, and another is pull apart test, which is again related to mechanical response of the monomer graphene system. Next slide. 4 clicks. So in this work, we have simulated epoxy and BMI resins and hardeners. As shown in the left-hand side figure, we will compare strength of resin to the other resin like DGEBA to the DETDA. And this, so another one is BMI monomers, where BMPM is resin and hardener is DABPA. So these monomers are different from each other in their structure as well as like type of atoms contained in it. So it's important to mention here again. So with these monomers, like people have used in literature, they have used flat carbon nanotube, but to reduce computational expenses, we have used graphene surface. And so in the right hand side figure, I have presented workflow to this simulation. We first simulate monomer and then combine it with graphene surface, and then we optimize it using density functional theory method. So we apply periodic boundary condition to mimic it as continuous system. Next. 3 clicks. Yeah, so in this slide, I'll be talking about the results obtained. So a graph at the left-hand side shows that epoxy resins, which is DGEBA, has higher interaction than BMI resin. Similarly, for hardeners, epoxy hardener DETDA has more interaction than BMI hardener DABPA. However, to validate that numbers, we have also calculated population of atoms, which can be defined as the number of atoms at the surface under 3 angstrom distance from the graphene surface, like as shown in the figure. So we have found that more is the population, higher is the population, higher is the interaction energy for that monomer graphene system. So the formula written downside here is the formula we use to calculate interaction energy. Next slide. 6 clicks. So we have calculated mechanical response using pull apart test, applying following formulas where force is defined as the derivative of energy with strain, and strain is defined as the displacement with respect to the equilibrium distance. So figure at the right hand side, the topmost figure demonstrates how with elongation a force strain curves looks like. So it shows that after some point, the curve is not linear anymore and material has started deforming. So for a monomer graphene system, as shown in the lower figure, right hand side, and the left hand side lower figure. So using the formula mentioned above, we have calculated for energy and then force for the various monomer system. So we found that the point where force starts decreasing is can be called as critical point or the breaking point, where monomer has no interaction left with the graphene. So to compare different monomers or graphene, we have calculated stiffness, force, and breaking point. I'll be talking about that results in next slide. Next slide, please. 4 clicks. Yeah, so in mechanical response, so the data obtained from pull-apart test suggested that there is some relationship between structure and the monomers. So we found that the hardener DETDA especially has lowest population, but it has the highest breaking point because of its planar structure. It will have more pi stacking at the surface because of its planar structure. So that's why it has more higher breaking point. Although among resins overall, mechanical response is higher for BMI monomer, which is again because of the structure and types of atoms contained in it. I'll be showing a structure of BMI in next slide. So basically, less dangling provides more interaction with the graphene sheet. So this work has been also published in ACS recently. Next slide. 3 clicks. So recently we have collaborated with Georgia Tech to validate their experimental data, where they have found that BMI polymer has 3 components and one of them has preferential stacking over the other. But since it is difficult to find it using experiments, we did some molecular level simulations using LAMMPS and provided that so these out of these 3 components, A, B, C, we found that A has more strength than B and C just because of its planar structure and less tangling. And it can be clearly seen in the rightmost figure. Next. So 3 clicks. So in the summary, we have obtained that mechanical response, which follows the order of interaction strength for monomer graphene system. So we found that interaction strength mainly depends on the nature of bonding at the surface, which is non-covalent for our case. And using DFT theory to find these results is helpful for experimentalists and manufacturers to develop data and to develop for the development of advanced composites. Next. Oh, yeah. So I have added this picture for just fun. So I would like to go to another planet for to get away from COVID in the summers. So in future work, I would like to study other monomers where these monomers contain fluorine atoms. And I'm also working, learning labs to study at macro levels. Next. So I would like to thank my advisor, first of all, who have been really kind support in all the time. And I would really like to thank NASA as well for providing such an amazing project to go through, and my committee members, my research group, and especially HPC, which I am using for calculations. Thank you. Next. Next. Yeah, so this has been exciting news that NASA has landed its rover on Mars. So I just added that picture, and I would welcome your questions and comments now. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I will start a 5-minute timer then for any questions that the judges have. So judges, you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask some questions.
Okay, hello, Danny, can I start first?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So hello, thanks Geeta for your interesting presentation. It was very nice. So I heard that all your work is simulation, right? I know that you said you validated your work based on Georgia Tech data, but other than that, all your work is simulation. Can I ask, how did you simulate your data, or which software did you use? Because this is not my field of study. I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I have used density functional theory method, and so what we are using is, so like obviously in experiments they have like in bulk, and they cannot study how a particular kind of monomer is interacting with graphene or a boron nitride or any other surface. So for my case, I'm using graphene. So to find particular monomers interaction with that kind of surface, we cannot do that with experiments with one monomer or two monomers. So we use this density functional theory method where I'm using just one monomer and one graphene sheet to find the interaction at the atomic level.
Great.
And to provide insight to the experiments so that they can know, like in that slide, I show that there is three components in BMI, but they don't know which has more preferential stacking than another one.
Okay.
We did that using atomic and molecular calculations.
Okay, thanks a lot. And one more thing. So in slide number 9, I guess it is very related to my work. You showed us something like force load graph, I guess.
Yes, yes.
So, I mean, can you use your material in tensile machines and validate your results based on the experiments? This thing, right?
So, ma'am, so the thing
Again, I'm not familiar with your field of study, so
No,
maybe
no,
my question seems silly to you.
no, that's a good question though. So it's just we are just simulating one monomer, ma'am. So we cannot just directly say that okay, this will has a similar, like if I have 0.1 terapascal strength for this monomer system, I won't say that it will have same number with experiments, but I can benchmark the results like, okay, I say that okay, epoxy has lower strength than BMI, and it has been observed with experiments as well. So it's like a benchmarking to the experiment results.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for your interesting and informative presentation. Thank you. No more questions from me.
Thank you for your questions.
My question was more towards the end of your presentation. So if you could mention maybe more about your future work and how you see your research contributing to, well, actually, Mars exploration and voyage.
Yeah, so basically this project is to study different materials computationally. So and once we study it computationally, like I am studying like 4 or 5 different monomers interaction with graphene, and then I'll provide this data to the macro level people who are studying these composite materials. And then once we find and we benchmark that results, it's not yet done, but because it's just materials properties, which is only mechanical properties. There are other teams who are working on other properties as well. And once we find that, okay, this BMI polymer has more strength than the another one, then this material will be used in these aircrafts, which is used for Mars in future, which can be used. But it's still not done. It's just at atomic level calculations, sir. So there are lot more to do on that. And in future work, so what I'm doing is, since I did atomic level calculation, I'm moving to the large number of molecules now. So I'm similar system like the BMI or epoxy. I'm having like earlier I was having just one monomer. Now I'm having like 10,000 of monomers in a box, which is computationally expensive, but I am just trying to relate and benchmark my own results. Like, what if I have that many number of monomers? Does it relate to the bulk level numbers? So that will be my future work, sir.
Thank you. Do you also see how these materials eventually could be folded into like GenPob, general population applications, or strictly for outer space, applications?
Yeah, so for my project, we are looking at for aerospace space applications, but yes, these materials are actually generally used as structure for structural applications, like for other automobiles or other surfaces as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for your question, sir.
All right, so while we give the judges a couple of minutes to go over their scoring, any quick questions from the general audience? If not, judges, just let us know when you're finished up and we can move on.
Yeah, I'm done.
Same here.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see if I can get my finicky computer to do this.
If you want, Rachel, I can share the slides. I have them pulled up.
Well, it's a good thing to have you ready to go as a backup. I'll keep going, but yeah, last time Sarvada had to take over for a minute, so it's good to know that you're ready. Okay, so so next we're gonna have Pankshnan. I'm sorry, I wish
I'm Ponkrishnan Tyagarajan.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. From mechanical engineering, and he will be presenting on uncertainty quantification of a rate-dependent cohesive zone model. So as soon as you are ready and start talking, I will start my timer.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. In this work, we have performed uncertainty quantification and Bayesian calibration of a rate-dependent cohesive zone model. Next. Next. So the motivation for performing Bayesian calibration is presented here. A computational model is a mathematical representation of a physical phenomenon. Now, any computational model will have an input X and they predict outputs Y. Now, apart from these inputs and outputs, there can be additional parameters to the computational model, which may or may not be obtained from experiments. So these parameters need to be calibrated in order to use these computational models. Now, thus, to calibrate these parameters, we have performed a Bayesian calibration. Next. For example, if we consider 1D Hooke's law, which connects stresses and strains through Young's modulus, now the Young's modulus is a parameter that we have to calibrate a priori if we have to use Hooke's law. So this Young's modulus is calibrated using experiments in general. Next. Yeah. Now the motivation for uncertainty quantification is presented. So a computational model has a lot of uncertainties associated with them. These can be basically divided into aleatoric and epistemic uncertainties. Aleatoric uncertainties represent the natural variability in the physical system. And the epistemic uncertainties can be again further classified into data uncertainty and model uncertainty. So the data uncertainty is caused because of limited experimental data or errors in the measurements of experiments. And the model uncertainty can be again further subdivided into discrepancy uncertainty, discretization, and parameters, where discrepancy uncertainty measures the difference between the experiments and the computational model. Discretization uncertainty is caused when we use numerical methods such as finite element to discretize the domain. And parameter uncertainty is caused because of the unknown parameters in the model. Next. Now, a brief introduction to the cohesive zone model that is used in this work. So a cohesive zone model is used to model failures of interfaces. Separation and tangential sliding of the contacting surface occurs due to local stress concentration, which results in failure of interfaces in materials such as composites. So as you can see from the figure on the right-hand side, consider that it is an infinitely long plate and we have a crack in between. Now, the cohesive zone is the crack tip and the damage and fracture occurs at the crack tip because of local stress concentration. Now, in a cohesive zone model, a traction separation law is defined that relates the stresses and the displacement that governs the crack propagation. Next. Now, why do we need a rate-dependent cohesive zone model? In polymer composite materials, crack initiation and propagation are shown to be rate-dependent. By rate-dependent, I mean they're dependent on the rate of applied stress. Now, thus a rate-dependent cohesive zone model was developed assuming finite elastic viscoplastic deformation to the model in this work. Now, the unknown parameters, we have totally 7 unknown parameters. On the right-hand side, I'm showing all the parameters, and the unknown parameters are highlighted in green. So a Bayesian calibration of these unknown parameters need to be performed to use this model, and the overall uncertainty quantification is also performed in this work. Next. So the objectives of this work are straightforward. The first objective is to calibrate the unknown parameters so that we could use this cohesive zone model. And the second one is to fit a discrepancy function to account for the difference between the experiment and the cohesive zone model. Third is to quantify the overall uncertainty in the predictions. And fourth is to perform a sensitivity analysis to better understand the input-output relationship. Next. Okay. I'm giving a flowchart of the methods here. So the goal is to predict the experimental response. The first step in doing that is to calibrate the unknown parameters using a Bayesian calibration. The inputs to the Bayesian calibration are the priors of the parameters and the experimental data. And out of Bayesian calibration, we get the posterior of parameters. With these posterior of parameters and simulation data and experimental data as inputs, a Gaussian process for discrepancy is fit. Now, why do we need a Gaussian process? Because we do not know the functional form of the discrepancy function a priori. So we use a Gaussian process, which is a surrogate model to fit the discrepancy. Now, once we have this GP for discrepancy, a Gaussian process can also be fit for simulation, and together these two can predict the experimental response along with the uncertainties associated with them. Next. I'll briefly go through what a Bayesian calibration is. So Kennedy and Hagen introduced Bayesian calibration, in which they introduced the experimental response as sum of calibration plus a discrepancy and an error in measurements. Now in this work, a modular approach is followed, in which the measurement error is assumed to be a Gaussian noise, and given the priors to be Gaussian, the likelihood can be evaluated as shown on the right. And given the priors and the likelihood are Bayesian, the posterior is also Bayesian, which can be evaluated through Monte Carlo sampling. Now, the need for discrepancy function is depicted in the slide. So as you can see on the right-hand side, in case of the figure A, we see that the dark line corresponds to experimental response and the gray lines correspond to mathematical simulation response. Now, if our computational model behaves in the way shown in the figure A, then we do not need a discrepancy function, because as we correctly calibrate the parameters theta, we'll be able to move the gray lines up and down and fit the experimental curve properly. But if our computational model behaves in the way shown in figure B, then we'll need a discrepancy function to properly fit the experimental response. Next. Now, a Gaussian process is a collection of random variables such that every finite linear combination of them is normally distributed. Now, we do a Gaussian regression, which is a distribution over functions is defined and inference is performed directly in the function space. Next. So in a Bayesian approach, we are interested in the probability of outputs given some input X and the data D. So if the prior and likelihood are Gaussian, this predictive distribution is also Gaussian. Next. So as you can see in the figure on the right-hand side, given one training and test data, this is a 2D plot of the Gaussian process, in which we can see that the alignment of the axis of the ellipses is dependent on the covariance matrix. So we learn this covariance matrix such that for any new prediction input, we can get the output of this model using a Gaussian process. Next. Now, the overall uncertainty in the model can be written as the sum of model uncertainty and the discrepancy uncertainty. So the model uncertainty is obtained from the Gaussian process of the simulation model, and discrepancy function is a product of GP of discrepancy function. Now, adding these two, we get the overall uncertainty of the model. Next. A sensitivity analysis is also performed to properly understand the input-output relationship. So on the right-hand side, we could see the first order and total indices. The first order index measures the effect of varying one parameter alone. And the total index measures the contribution to the output variable by including all the variances caused by the interaction of one parameter. So by doing the sensitivity analysis, we could understand which input parameters are the most sensitive to the outputs. Next. So the results of Bayesian calibration are seen here. So we have assumed the Gaussian priors as shown for the 6 parameters that need to be calibrated. And after performing the Bayesian calibration, we could see the posterior on the right. So this is again the load displacement curve after evaluating the coercive zone model. So we could see that with the prior so the dots represent the experimental response here, and the blue curve is the prior parameters, and the posterior response is shown as red curves. Now we could see that posterior captures the post-damage response very well in this in all the 3 strain rates. Next. Now, the need for discrepancy function for this coercive zone is shown here. We could see that the blue curves without discrepancy, the coercive zone model was not able to predict experimental response properly. But once we added the discrepancy function, the black curves can now predict experimental response very well. And we could also see that error between simulation and experiments have reduced significantly after introducing the discrepancy function. Next. Now, the overall uncertainty quantification is shown here with 95% confidence interval. So the gray zone shows the 95% confidence, and the red dots are the experimental data, and blue curve is the mean of the predictions. So we could see that after performing this, the coercive zone model's predictions lie always within the confidence interval of the experiments. Next. So the results of sensitivity analysis is shown here. The left-hand picture shows the Sobel's indices of first order, and the right-hand shows the total index. We could see that normal stiffness, displacement at damage onset, and displacement at final failure are the most sensitive parameters to this coercive zone model. Now, to summarize, we have done a Bayesian calibration to calibrate unknown parameters, and a discrepancy function is sequentially calibrated following the unknown parameters by fitting a Gaussian process. Overall uncertainty quantification is performed, and the predictions are provided with confidence interval. Next. We also have performed a sensitivity analysis to understand the effects of inputs. Next. I would like to thank my advisor, Dr. Ghosh, the GSG, for giving us this opportunity, our collaborator, Dr. Sain, and our research group, and all the other research group members for their support. Thank you.
All right. Right in time with the 1-minute warning. So great. So I'll start the timer then if the judges would like to unmute and ask any questions.
Mary, you want to go first?
If you want, you can go ahead, please.
Oh, okay.
It's your turn now.
I was ready for you to go first. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. Very informative. That was a lot of information right there. Can you tell me more about, Rachel, can you just go one slide up, please? CZM, sorry, I just was blanking on that. Can you talk a bit more about that, the application of it? And
that is the CZM is the coercive zone model. Hello, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so the CZM is the coercive zone model that we have developed for understanding the fracture of polymer composite material.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for your very good presentation. So I have a question. This is my understanding, maybe I'm right. So your simulation results were very close to experimental data before the yield point, I guess. Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Why is that? Can you explain that?
So, so plasticity comes into picture once the material starts yielding. and the computational model can take into account the effect of elastic behavior of the material very well, but the plasticity is not still understood by the computational model. That's why before the first peak, we could see that it exactly predicts the experimental response, and once after the peak, it is not able to predict as much before the discrepancy.
Okay, perfect. And did you talk about the material that you use? I don't remember.
This is in general a coercive zone model can be used for any material
But
deformation.
what is the
but
material that you are
specifically
using
this
the
is
experimental data from? What material?
this experimental data is for
Mhm.
for composite material,
Perfect. Thank you.
polymer composites. Thank
Got
you.
it. Thanks. No more questions. Very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so a little bit of time here for the judges to do their scoring. Let us know when you are ready to move on to the third person. And then any general questions from the audience while we wait?
I think there is one question. How were the priors decided for the parameters? Oh, that's a very good question. So priors for Bayesian calibration are very important. In our case, we decided the priors by getting the fracture energy for different parameters. And then we ran a KNN, K nearest neighbor clustering algorithm to get the values for priors. So we plotted the fracture energies and then ran a KNN algorithm to get the prior information. Thank you.
Thank you for reading that out of the chat. Like I said, I can't open the chat, so it looks like someone else just maybe said something too.
Oh, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, I finished my scoring.
Yes, same here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our third presentation is from Nirav on simulating the universe with convolutional neural networks. So as soon as you are ready to get started, I will start the timer.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. So today we'll be simulating our own universe with some state-of-the-art neural networks. Next slide, please. So just to give you an estimate, this is known as the large-scale structure of our universe. In this, light travels from sun to us in 8 minutes and 20 seconds, but for light to travel this entire screen will take 5 billion years. I'm just giving you this figure so as you will have some estimate of what we are dealing with. So this is a large-scale structure, and it has basically 3 types of structures: superclusters, which you can see right in the middle upper side. Superclusters consist of clusters of groups of galaxies, and then we have filaments, which consist of a lot of superclusters, and they are thread or sheet-like structures. And then you have voids, which are highly underdense regions of the universe where there is no structure present. Next. So why do we need cosmological simulation? What's the need of it? So you know that in any scientific domain, you need to compare your observations or your measurements with some theoretical predictions. But when you are talking about billions or trillions of particles, there are no analytical formulas in cosmology, neither in molecular dynamics. So what you do is you simulate your entire system. So what we do is we simulate a lot of particles, like 512 cubed in my case, and then we compare our theory with our observations from the state-of-the-art surveys that are in the space as well as in the ground. Also, we will be needing a mock galaxy catalog so that we can study how the galaxy properties vary with various parameters of the universe. And thirdly, there are very large surveys that are upcoming, such as Euclid, LSST, and WFIRST. So they will be needing fast simulations as well. But you know, there are issues in every field. So what issues we have in simulations are, so there are 2 types of simulations: n-body and fast. N-body simulations are very extremely accurate on all scales, but they're highly time expensive computationally, because a typical n-body sim takes roughly 500 CPU hours to complete. That's like 21 days. On the other hand, the fast simulations are very cheap, but they are inaccurate on small scales. So we need faster tools. Next comes machine learning. A typical machine learning based model takes roughly 10 GPU hours to train on entire data and just a couple of minutes to generate a new simulation, which has the added benefit of being fast, which is a great success in scientific domain. Next. So what are n-body simulations? So in n-body simulation, we simulate the cold dark matter particles under the effect of Newtonian gravity alone. You can think of cold dark matter as a human skeleton and each organ of a body as a galaxy inside that skeleton. So what we do is we compute the force field for a configuration of particles, and then we move the particles in this force field. Below, in the figure here below, you can see that this is the Quixote simulation, in which you can see very underdense regions that are blackish, as well as filament sheets and clusters. Next. So the process goes as follows. We have initial conditions that we set using the power spectrum of the model. I'll explain later what power spectrum is. We place 512 cubed particles on a 3D grid. We perturb them a little, and then we evolve them with the laws of gravity. We move the particles by one time step and see if the time is what we want our results at. If yes, we output. Otherwise, we repeat the process. Next. So n-body sims are accurate, but as I said, they're highly costly. The reason is they consist of thousands of time steps to evolve the particles. So we need some fast approximation techniques. We also know that the Lagrangian perturbation theory is highly effective in emulating the large scales. So next. What we do is we decouple our scales. We divide it into two different parts, linear, which are the large scales that we can use LPT on, that is the fast simulations, and the non-linear scales, which are the smaller scales where there is a structure present. When I say non-linear, it means where there is no linearity, there is no isotropy and no homogeneity, such as the solar system or a black hole or the center of our galaxy. And these nonlinear scales can be evolved with a fully blown n-body, and it only takes tens of time steps, but they are less accurate. Next. Now, convolutional neural networks. So before I explain them, these are the basic applications of CNNs these days. You know the basic image classification, which is a very hype these days about cat and dog classification and different others. Then we have image captioning, where you have a picture and you provide a suitable caption for it. You have pose recognition, you have image retrieval, and then you have image segmentation, which is right now very famous for driverless cars, where you are dividing your image into various segments in real time. And then you have style transfers for various stylistic filters in Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook, etc. Next. So how CNNs work is it's based on how our eyes see. So our eyes see a particular portion, and then a layer of neurons focuses on each small portions of what we see. It forms some representations on very small scales, and then it passes on that information to the next layer of neurons, which combines them into something more meaningful. And this process goes on between different layers until our brain interprets what our eyes are seeing. So convolutional neural networks are a specific type of neural network in which, next, you take a filter. On the lower left, you can see that there is a subcube of white color that is going through an image. It's focusing on different parts of an image and learning a feature, which it's using to create what's called an activation map, which is the white ball layers on the lower left. On the lower right, you can see that we have a set of images of faces of men and women. Our input layer is reading these images, and then it's finding the patterns of local contrast. Then it's passing on this information to the next layer, which is the hidden layer 1, which is combining them together to something more meaningful, such as the features of our face, like nose, eyes, etc., which is further transferring it up to so on. At the end, you can see that there are only just 2 neurons. This will give you the probability of a particular image belonging to a man or woman. Next. So what neural networks are learning? So this is a carefully crafted filter, which will tell you what it learns. So A is original image. In B, it's learning the color contrast. In my case, it's learning the features, the black color regions of my face, such as the eyebrows, the hair, the beard, etc. In C, it's learning segments. So it has divided the whole picture into 2 segments, one of my shirt and another one in the blue. It's also trying to do its best to differentiate between my metallic spectacles as well as the boundary between wall and the floor. And at the very last, it's trying to learn the fine pixel granules. Next. So here we are seeing that the input to our neural network, we are working with 13 terabytes of data. So data handling is a very big thing, using data pipelines and everything. So we are inputting the displacement field of our fast simulation as input, and we are taking the residual, that is the difference in displacement field between n-body and fast. And then we are outputting the same thing. Next. So these show you the density fields. On the lower left, you have the input. On the upper left, you have the target. And on the lower right, you have the output. So we need, the neural network is giving us an output, and we are telling it that we are not happy with your results. That's a metric known as a loss function, which just quantifies our happiness or unhappiness with our results. And the main aim of the neural network is to please us in this happiness. Next. So now I'm showing some preliminary results. So in the center of these two slices where they interact, where they intersect on the left side, we are present. So this is us at the center. Each black point here is a galaxy. So we calculate something known as a 2-point correlation function, or 2PCF, which just tells you what is the excess probability of finding a galaxy between a pair of points as compared to a random distribution. We compare, we calculate this whole thing, and then what we do is we take its Fourier transform. Next. And Fourier transform gives us the extremely important statistic in cosmology, which is the power spectrum. Power spectrum gives you the distribution of, or the power of structure on different scales of the universe. At the left end of the x-axis, we have lower numbers, which actually mean higher scales. That means the larger scales. And at the right end, we have the smaller scales. As you can see that our target matches very well with our output. And that means that neural networks are predicting extremely good on linear scales as well as mildly non-linears. But on the right side near 10 to the power 0, you can see that there is a deviation. The aim of this project is to reduce this deviation, because neural networks had to predict good in non-linear scales as well. Next. These are my results for bispectrum. So as I told you that 2-point correlation function, it tells you about the excess probability between 2 points. Similarly, a 3PCF tells you the probability of finding a galaxy in a triangle configuration. Because after Big Bang, we had an inflation era in which there were some non-Gaussianity signatures that were introduced. And bispectrum gives you the information on that. As you can see that on the right-hand side, that neural networks are really good at predicting bispectrum as well. I'm sorry, the graph looks a little discrete, but it's because it takes a lot of computational time and my grid size is very high. Next. So my conclusions are as follows. The n-body simulation, let's say I want to generate 100 realizations of that. By realization, I mean a copy, an ensemble in thermodynamic terms. N-body simulation takes roughly 2 years and 10 months to generate these 100 realizations, which is a lot of time. But they have the extreme benefit of being accurate, extremely accurate. The 2LPT or fast simulation, on the other hand, just take a day and 10 hours, but they are very inaccurate on smaller scales. Our neural net model, on the other hand, generates these 100 realizations in just 1 hour and 40 minutes with an accuracy which is 99.13% of our n-body simulations. So we conclude that deep CNNs map from LPT to n-body simulations down to scales that are as small as 0.4 MPC. MPC means megaparsecs. And this scale is roughly the size of a galaxy. And they are extremely time efficient and accurate. We are still struggling on very small scales, but new features and models are still evolving. The results shown here are in the past, like 1 month before. Right now, I have increased my model's accuracy to 99.93%, but I couldn't present it here. So that's the conclusion, that the project is really important in decreasing time, because we have a lot of surveys going on in the space that needs very fast theoretical results to compare with.
1 minute.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Oops, mute problems. Okay. Any questions then from the judges? We have about 5 minutes for judge questions.
So I'm going to start this time, if it's fine, Danny.
Right.
So thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Honestly, I don't have any question, but it was very interesting to see that you, using your model, you could reduce the simulation time by 1 hour, 40 minutes, you said?
Yes.
It was very interesting to see. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for your job. It was very good presentation. Thank you. No more questions.
Thanks.
Similarly, to Mary, excellent presentation. It's not really a question, it's more like a discussion for the follow-up. Do you expect that your CNN is going to replace in many ways the longer tests? Is that the purpose of it, or it's just right now just an in between?
It's not actually in between. It has been found in some cases that CNNs actually overcome the limitations of even the N-body simulation. So when you talk about cosmology, N-body simulations are the most accurate simulations ever. So if something is reaching even 90% of that, that's a big achievement. The neural networks, on the other hand, are in some cases even generalizing to the cases where the parameters are different. So what you need to do is for a specific set of parameters, you run an N-body simulation and you see how accurate your results are. But what neural nets are capable of in addition to this is you train them on a different set of parameters and they will give you predictions on that even without knowing what the N-body simulations are correspondingly. So it's a really big thing and they have outperformed even the N-body simulations in some cases, but those are different kind of projects.
Okay. What about unpredictable elements? I mean, maybe that has not been yet, discovered or understood. Obviously, anybody would take more time to really go through all of the options. You would have much more clear understanding what's going on. What about CNN?
So it actually depends. So that's the big question in front of science community these days, is whether the neural networks are learning just the representation of what's given to you, or whether it's learning the actual physics behind it. And we have seen that it is learning the actual physics behind it. And as far as your question about the unpredictable elements is concerned, see, we are simulating 512 cubed particles. Even if 10,000 of them are unpredictable, it doesn't change the overall statistics of the universe, because we are right now in an epoch where we are seeing a single realization of the universe. But when you're talking about ensembles, it doesn't matter where each particle is predicted by the neural net. It matters what's the overall statistic of that sample is. So it really doesn't matter.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, so while we give the judges a couple minutes, does anybody have any questions? All right, so I mean, I'm gonna at least hang tight while the judges finish their scoring. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is, I believe, the last time slot for the sessions. There was one other one going on right now, but they're probably wrapping up as well. And the only other thing I think we have going on is the awards ceremony, which is from 5 to 7. If you don't already have a link for that, you should be able to get that from the GRC website, gsg.mtu.edu/GRC. Again, thank you all for coming, and please let me know if you have any comments or questions about the sessions as a whole. Thank you. I'm going to stop screen sharing now so I can look at the chat. All right, I'm going to hang tight with the judges, but otherwise, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.